I turned 60 a few months ago. 60 is generally a time of reflection when you look back and take stock. I took stock of the relationships I've shared in my life, especially the one with my mother. So it was in Ranchi that it all began for me. Ranchi back then in the 60s and 70s was a quiet, small town. Today it's better known as the cricketer Mahendra Singh Dhoni's hometown. Incidentally, we also share our birthdays, 7th July 0707. So at the time that we grew up in Ranchi, we lived very predictable lives. It was home, school, home, or home, college, home. But even in that predictability, I looked forward to a few things as a child growing up. One, my dad's visits to the vegetable market. Hart, it used to be called, HAAT in the local language, similar to the farmers market that we have today. So my dad would visit this market on Tuesdays and Fridays to bring back bagfuls of the most luscious fruits you could ever imagine. Mangoes, lychees and jamuns that Ranchi was so famous for. I would go with him on some days to this market, and I can still recall the buzz, the people, the crowd, the noise, the flavors. The other thing I looked forward to as a kid was my daily trot to the local pan shop. My father was a great pan lover. He liked to have his pan customized. We were taught to say Kala, Pila, Chuna, Pan, Katha Nahi. When I say we, I mean the four siblings. And we were given turns to walk down to the shop unescorted and bring back this pan for my dad. I somehow loved this outing because one, I could go on my own. Second, there was a sense of adventure about this outing. The third thing I looked forward to was later in life as a teenager. I loved the Ranchi rains. They were magical and something dreamy about it. I would sit by the window, lost in my own thoughts, singing old Hindi film songs. I would also look at the window in the opposite apartment to see if the Bihari boy was visible. Because for some reason I thought the Bihari boy liked me. Where did I get this idea? A couple of times when I wore red, he sang Lal Chadi Maidan Khadi. And then I wore this davani, which is the dress that South Indian girls wear with the lehenga and the dupatta. And he shouted out, Adha sari kahan ud gaya, which means where is the other half of the sari? These two reactions from him on something that I wore were enough to convince me that he had a soft corner for me. So I would always be looking out to see if I could see him. But the more important thing was that during the rains, I would also write my entries in my diary. The diary was my escape route. My entries would always begin with, Dear Diary. On one afternoon, I wrote about how I detested my mother. This was after a terrible argument I had. Perhaps I was 15 then. Snoopy and inquisitive that my mother was, as all mothers are, and I have been too, my mother spotted the diary and she read the entry. And she never let me forget that for a long time. But to me, that entry suggested the kind of relationship I would be sharing with my mother for the rest of her lifetime. I was born after much prayer and penance, but I wasn't the answer to my parents' prayers because after their first two girl child, they had prayed for a son in their third pregnancy. And so when I arrived as their third daughter, it was in a mood of dejection and disappointment. Setting me aside, my parents continued to pray. A year later, they were blessed with God's gift from heaven, a son. I grew up feeling the odd one out, of standing outside the circle of my other three siblings, squashed as I was between the two elder sisters and a younger brother. This sort of prompted in me an enormous need for acceptance, approval, and attention from the rest of the family. So I took on some behavioral patterns. I turned the funny one in the family, the clown. I was either making the rest of them laugh or I allowed myself to be laughed at. I realized this behavior came out of my desperate need to fit in, to be noticed by them. especially my mother. As a kid, I loved my mom to bits, as all kids do. She could do no wrong. But when I grew into my adult years, I started noticing her shades of grey, her obsessive, even stifling relationship with her 4 children, her need to be at the center of our lives. And every time she displayed this side of her, I called her out. My sisters would tell me, let her be, your points could be valid, but she's not going to change. Why do you make it so difficult for yourself and for her? But regardless of what they said to me, I continued to call out my mother and tell her how wrong she was in what she was doing. Looking back, I realized if I did that as my way of paying her back for the rejection I felt when I was born, or my way of getting her attention by whatever means, even if it wasn't the most pleasant ways to do it. All this while, I of course loved her and showered her with unconditional love. To me, just to bring that smile on her face was ever so important. Her every wish was my command. I could do anything, to go to any lengths to keep her happy. But there was something in me that also brought out something so difficult for both of us to come to terms with. And then she was diagnosed with breast cancer. She was given time to live. That was my wake-up call. I hit the panic button. I knew I had to make up to her, apologize to her, and I couldn't let her go without doing that. Most of all, I couldn't award myself a lifetime sentence of guilt. So I chose to work remote from my overseas job, to be there for her, to take her, accompany her for her chemo sessions, to watch over her while she ate, slept, clean her bed sores and pus wounds. All the while I tried having little conversations with her, trying to explain myself. And then one afternoon, a few months before she passed away, she called me and said, "You know, Vasanthi, I see so much of myself in you. You are as feisty as I was. And every time you showed me the mirror, you were not wrong. In fact, you were the only one among the 4 children that really read me right." She said sometimes she was afraid that she was too transparent to me. And then she said, "I couldn't have asked for a better nurse when I needed it most." That afternoon I felt I had finally won her acceptance, her approval and her attention as her 3rd daughter, unwanted no more. I visited Ranchi a couple of times. I went to her house. The owners were kind enough to let me walk through the rooms. I sat by the window where I would watch the rains. I looked at the opposite window. It was tightly shut. The pawn shop was no more there. The heart still ran. But in my house, the backyard, the guava tree, I watched that. I remembered my mother screaming at me every time I would try climbing it. And then I also went through the conversations that she and I had. Thankfully, these conversations didn't really hurt this time. I felt a sense of peace that I had made up with her. It's been 2 years since she passed away. I speak to her every day. I wear her clothes. I dress myself in them. And I still talk to her. These conversations are no more confrontational, no more conflicting, no more argumentative. It's been a week since Mother's Day passed, but I would like to take this opportunity to tell her how much I love her and to wish her Happy Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day, Ma. You always were and you always will be important to me. Love you.